Good afternoon. I'm Kim Maphis Early with the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. This special webinar is brought to you by the Center for Disaster Philanthropy and the Simmons Foundation, whose president joins us now.
Hello, I'm Amanda Cloud, the president and CEO of the Simmons Foundation. We're grateful for our partnership with CDP and want to welcome all of you attending this briefing. And thank you for your interest in the recovery from Hurricane Harvey and appreciate your investments and support of our region. Over the next few months, we'll be exploring many topics, and we hope that you'll join us for each call. We believe that by continuing to bring attention to the ongoing needs of individuals, families, and communities, we can support funders in making strategic investments that will help survivors of Harvey plan and implement projects that will have a positive impact for the greatest number of those in need. At the beginning of each briefing, we'll be sharing updates about ongoing Hurricane Harvey recovery efforts and hearing from experts in a variety of disaster-related fields: mental health, housing, hazard mitigation, volunteer activities, and nonprofit service providers, among others, and most importantly, from veteran disaster funders. At the close of each briefing, we'll have opportunities for funders to share information about their work and ask questions of each other.
Thank you, Amanda. As a reminder, before we get started, this webinar is being recorded. And we'll also send a copy of the written report to your registration email. As participants, you can submit a question at any time using the Q&A box on your screen and simply type your question and hit send. We'll try to get all the questions in before the close of the webinar. Also, for funders, if you would like to share information about the work that you are doing, you may feel free to raise your hand. And as we get into that portion of the webinar, we'll be hearing from other funders, I'll turn the mic over to you and you can introduce yourself with your name and your foundation, and then share the information you'd like the other funders to know or ask questions of other funders. By way of introduction for our time together, I think that we can all agree with the scientists at NOAA that 2017 was the most expensive disaster year on record in the United States. There was $306 billion worth of damage from 16 events with $1 billion of damage in each, mostly from hurricanes. Sadly, in addition to property loss, 251 combined confirmed hurricane fatalities occurred and 54 confirmed wildfire fatalities. And yet at the start of this year, another 20 confirmed fatalities from related mudslides from the wildfires. The focus of our time together over the next few weeks is going to be Harvey and the recovery from that hurricane. And Harvey alone caused an estimated $125 billion worth of damage. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Jackie Covington, a certified emergency manager who works for FEMA in its Interagency Recovery Coordination and Philanthropic Advising functions assigned to the Texas office. We have a lot to learn about the impact of these disasters, and Jackie is going to provide us with a Harvey recovery update. Welcome, Jackie. Jackie, let me remind you to unmute your microphone as you begin to share your information. Thanks. We're not getting an audio feed from Jackie right now. We'll come back to her later in this time together. Denise, if we could move ahead to you for right now. Denise is a colleague of Jackie's in FEMA's Interagency Recovery Coordination and a philanthropic advisor in the Office of Response and Recovery. She's going to share information about the roles of FEMA and how the federal government interacts with philanthropy to advance the recovery aims of affected communities. Thank you for being here, Denise. We have a few questions for you.
Sure.
There may be folks in our time here together that are new to disaster funding. So if you would, could you share with us what support FEMA will provide for intermediate to long-term recovery?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Both Jackie and I actually do get deployed to disaster operations, and we work with the state and our federal and nonprofit partners. And we really try hard to build coalitions among those partners to really look and examine all the things that FEMA can fund and make our philanthropic partners in particular aware of those things so that we don't duplicate our efforts. So our mantra really is to help those funders understand that there are going to be gaps for the recovery efforts and that their role, should they want to be involved in that, would be to look at what those gaps are and how they could perhaps work with the federal resources and leverage some of those for maximum benefit. So that's a big part of what our role is. And I'm over here now in Florida, obviously, and Jackie's there working Harvey in Texas. So I work closely with the Council on Foundations and also with the Center for Disaster Philanthropy on their advisory board, actually. And we really try hard to just share the information about what's happening, provide that situational awareness and ground truth so that the funders can ask questions of us and can be in the loop on what's really happening, because that's very difficult to do just from the news media. It's really having awareness of what the capacity might be of the organizations that are already doing some of the work and hopefully not duplicate efforts of things that are already being funded. So I think that's a big part of our role, to provide that coordination and information sharing that everyone seems to really value.
Thanks, Denise. You mentioned that you feel that part of your work is to make sure there's not duplication and to make sure information is out there for funders. Can you share some examples of how private philanthropy has worked with federal support programs to fill gaps in unmet needs?
Sure. Well, one of the things that we work with closely with the voluntary agencies, and so those are our voluntary agency liaisons that are deployed to the disaster, of which Jackie and I have both filled that role as well. And we work in those folks work in the communities and partner up with the funders and the other and to build those coalitions with nonprofits that become the support for the long-term recovery for individuals and households. And so those groups are focused on the individual disaster-related unmet needs that come as a result of the disaster. So it's really a focus on disaster. These are not social service organizations. They really are focused on disaster recovery. But in addition to those groups, right now, Jackie and I both work with the Interagency Coordination Group, and those are partnerships with the federal partners as well as the state and local communities. And they're focused on what those needs are in the community to build, whether it's to build back infrastructure, maximize the mitigation possibilities and opportunities, and any of the other sort of community-wide recovery gaps that occur, and how those teams can work and provide technical assistance to help them have the most robust recovery possible. So we right now have teams working in both Florida and Texas to do just that. And so they'll be identifying special projects that are really needed in those communities for recovery and working to try to find funding sources for those projects.
Great. Give us a little bit of an idea about how long FEMA staff members will remain in Texas.
Well, that's a very difficult question, but our standard answer really is that when there's a large-scale disaster such as Harvey in Texas, there will be FEMA staff there for many, many years to come. We've had people in Louisiana for over 20 years after Katrina. We have the FEMA region is in Denton, Texas, so we will basically have FEMA staff working on Harvey for as long as it takes for our public assistance grants to be utilized, and still the FEMA region will be there long term if that's where they're located. So we will have FEMA staff for the foreseeable future in Texas.
That's probably a comfort to all of us, maybe not so much for you and FEMA, given all the deployments that you've undergone this past year. You mentioned public assistance and individual assistance. When does the clock start ticking for folks to register for those types of assistance? And when's the deadline, and why is that important to a community?
Sure. Well, it's actually really important not to focus on the deadlines per se, because in large-scale disasters, those deadlines almost always get extended. So initially, after the disaster declaration is announced, there's a 30-day registration period, which is almost always extended to 60 days and much more often 90 days and beyond. And it's also important for people who have extenuating circumstances. For example, if an individual is in the hospital, is unable to, able to register, then they will look at those, on a case-by-case basis if they happen to miss a deadline. But the state and FEMA work closely together to determine how long that registration deadline will happen. And the Small Business Administration deadlines usually follow those as well.
Great. Is there any other news you want to share with us before we turn to Jackie for her update on recovery?
I think just one thing I would like to say is I'm very excited about the fact that the funders in Texas are working together closely and having these conversations. I think it's really important for them to work together and share sort of best practices for recovery and perhaps not duplicate efforts, make a determination about what they happen to be passionate about or what specific locality they may have interest in locating, and so that not all of the funders are working in the same space, so to speak, and that they support each other. And they also learn about what opportunities there are to actually leverage large federal resource grants by offering, for example, to pay for cost share for certain large federal grants that will really help promote recovery. So we really want to help the funders look at what those leveraging opportunities are if they have an interest in supporting and helping those federal grants go through. Because oftentimes there are really wonderful projects that don't happen because the local community or entity doesn't have the funding for the smaller amount of cost share funding, which is usually about 25% of a project.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Just as a reminder to our audience, you can post your questions to our panelists using the question and answer box on your screen. And we're going to be moving to conversation with funders at the conclusion of our chat with Jackie and Denise. So use the raise your hand icon to let us know that you have something to share when we reach that time. Now we'll get back to Jackie. And Jackie, we're going to ask you to share with us a little bit about the recovery in Texas.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
You're coming through loud and clear.
Oh, I am. Oh, thank you. I apologize for the technical difficulties today. But I would like to share some information from Hurricane Harvey. As of January the 26th, we've had over 3,700 federal personnel supporting Harvey recovery. Public assistance has obligated over $519 million in funding. The Texas Department of Emergency Management has received over 1,100 requests for public assistance. There have been over 91,000 policyholders that have filed flood insurance claims. The National Flood Insurance Program has paid out $8.2 billion in Harvey claims. Total SBA applications received have been over 107,000. SBA has approved for businesses and homeowners $3.1 billion. We currently have 21 disaster recovery service centers open in 11 counties. Our transitional sheltering assistance currently has over 9,700 applicants checked in, and there are over 11,000 rooms currently being occupied. The individual assistance, 41 counties declared for individual assistance. The survivors have received over $12.8 billion in federal assistance. There have been over 599,000 FEMA inspections. For this disaster, the housing mission will be state administered and locally managed. The federal government is providing technical assistance and financial support. We currently have about 17 long-term recovery groups established, and there's others that are still organizing. Our recovery support functions have identified several issues for potential funding opportunities. Some of those issues have included support for long-term recovery groups, children and youth recovery issues, grants for local match, housing counseling, technical assistance and training for local municipalities, peer-to-peer engagement, restoring and building arts and culture, and training for skilled laborers. We have in the works planning for 2 to 4 recovery symposia that will target local elected officials, planning directors, floodplain managers, community leaders, decision makers in long-term recovery. Peers will come in to share their experiences, best practices, lessons learned, and tips to help build a more resilient community. Our Health and Social Services Recovery Support Function has lined up potential projects that they will soon be initiating to include peer-to-peer recovery planning, healthcare systems capacity building, and also psychological first aid train the trainer projects. So there has been a lot of focus here in Harvey for mental health issues, the schools, also supporting the long-term recovery groups. Although we know housing is the #1 priority, the Department of Housing and Urban Development currently has strike teams that are going out to the hardest hit communities and assisting them with their housing plans and also planning their pre-disaster recovery planning efforts. So I have been able to attend these meetings. We have another set planned for February that I will be attending, introducing myself and offering the communities any type of support that I can support them with and connecting them to philanthropic organizations that could possibly meet their unmet needs where federal funds cannot cover those needs.
Thanks, Jackie.
I could go. This is such a disaster of a big magnitude, so there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of things, but this has been a great disaster. The state of Texas has really mobilized and come together to make sure that this is a good recovery and that all the citizens' needs are addressed. I did want to mention one other thing before I close, that the Rebuild Texas Funders Forum was on the 25th. So we did have a group of funders come together and share ideas. I was there and offered my assistance in any way that I could support, sharing data, maps, information, making introductions, or whatever I can do to support. And I'm here to support the entire state. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. You mentioned recovery symposia. Do you have dates and locations for those?
I will. Currently, our community planning and capacity building team are planning those events as we speak. So in the near future, those will be planned and I can get the word and information out. Great.
And if you can, share that with us, and then on our funder briefings, we'll share that with our audience. Now we'll take questions for Jackie and Denise. As you can tell, there's a lot of information and experience that they have, and you can type your questions and click send. We have one. Can you please share the location and the schedule for the HUD strike teams?
Okay. I will have to get back to check to see if I could get that information.
Okay. And if you will, then share it with me, and then on our next briefing, I can share it with others. Righty,
okay. I will see if I can get that. Right now, it's targeted towards local officials.
Okay.
I'm not sure how expanded open it is, but I will let you know.
Perfect. Thanks, Jackie. Here's our next question. This may be a crystal ball sort of question, but between the two of you, how long should we anticipate that it's going to take to restore the landscape and infrastructure and the built environment that's been damaged by Harvey? Any guesses?
Well, I think you can only look at the coast of Mississippi and some parts of Louisiana to answer that question. It takes as long as it takes. And it really depends on how robust the recovery efforts are and how the federal funding plays out and what kind of decisions the local community makes. Because one of the things that we're really promoting and in our sort of our place-based recovery mission with the communities is helping them make smart decisions. In other words, building back sometimes isn't the right decision if it's in a repetitive flood loss area. So what you may end up seeing is extensive delays and years before decisions are made as to what is the best use of some of the disaster impacted places that have happened. So I think it's really important not to put a number on it and not to expect anything to happen quickly. Some places will come back much more quickly than others, and there'll be good reasons for that. But I think when it comes to looking at areas that have had a repetitive flood loss in the past, building those places back is not necessarily a good recovery solution. But Jackie's there in Texas, so she can give you the inside story there.
Yeah, one of our initiatives here is to make sure the community builds back more resilient, be prepared for the next event. So at the current time, here in Austin, where I'm based, this office will be turning into a long-term recovery office. So it's the long-term out years that it's going to take. And our hope is that the communities will be better prepared in so many ways with their planning, their response, and their recovery to the next event. So we're here to make sure all those planning efforts, are followed through and do whatever we can to make sure that the state becomes more resilient.
Thanks. That's a good, healthy dose of realism and optimism at the same time. I want to remind everyone that there will be a recording and a written report of this webinar at the close, so you can count on finding that at the Simmons website in their issue areas on Harvey recovery, or you can receive a copy of the written report through your registration email. Here's another question. When will the request for proposals be released for the community development block grants?
I am not sure at this time what specifically with the proposal with the CDBG. Do you have a little bit more information on that question?
That was the question from a participant. When would the request for proposals for the community development block grants be issued?
Okay, we can do a follow-up on that one if we could.
Okay, great. Thank you. This is a question for Amanda. Amanda, have the findings and learnings been captured for the Rebuild Texas Funders Forum? And if so, how can you get a copy of them? That may also be a question that we're going to have to research and get back with you on. But when we get the answers to these, we'll include them in our written report. Here's another question. Jackie mentioned a list of funding opportunities. How were those issues identified? And are those items on the list because of restrictions in federal or state funds for those activities, or because there's an expectation that government funds won't address those items?
You know, these were potential funding opportunities that were presented by our recovery support functions. Denise had mentioned the Interagency Recovery Coordination, which we work with. Our recovery support functions covers 6 sectors. They're community planning, capacity building, housing, infrastructure systems, natural and cultural resources, economic, health and social services. So a team comes in and we prepare a report called the Mission Scoping Assessment, where some of these issues have been identified. And I just share information that these are potentials. Federal funds can cover some of these, but there may be a gap on others where federal funds cannot cover, and that would be an opportunity for a philanthropic dollar.
Thank you, Jackie. Can you and Denise talk a little bit more specifically about what's being done to help build resilience?
Well, one of our big programs, and I don't know what the dollar amounts are going to be for Texas at this time. Jackie may have that information, but in our hazard mitigation grant program, for example, FEMA can grant funds to the state, and they can choose projects that really promote resilience, which is basically getting people out of harm's way and making the communities more resilient to the next event. And one of the ones that we're really looking at is the acquisition program, which means the individual whose home has been in a repetitive flood and volunteers to have their home bought out, and the value of that will be determined basically the day before the flood event, so before any damages happen, and they will be able to use that money to relocate. So that's a really wonderful program that gets people out of harm's way permanently. And the other wonderful thing that happens from that is that land where the acquisitions and the buyout program is put into effect becomes natural open space. So it can only be used for parks and playgrounds and things like that. Can never be built on again. And so that's an example of how the community becomes more resilient because we get people out of harm's way. And we also have that open space land where the flooding can occur and do no harm. And there are many other examples, and I don't know right now if Texas is looking at any other really specific things, but Jackie may have knowledge of those.
Sure, thank you, Denise. I'd just like to pinpoint back on the recovery symposia. Those are really built to build resiliency across the whole community. When the community planning capacity building team goes in, they bring partners in from the community, academia, individuals, officials. They bring the whole community in and discuss ways in an open forum to build resiliency in their planning efforts, not only with the symposia, but also the team will go in and provide technical assistance to teach the community how to put their plans together. And when it's time to execute those plans, they will be ready. So our community planning and capacity building recovery support function is a real strong support in recovery for building resiliency in a community, because it's addressing not only on the individual level, but also the community side on the infrastructure.
Thank you, Jackie.
Sure.
You've mentioned several times that there are reports where they identify gaps for philanthropic support. Will those reports come out of the long-term recovery committees, or where will those be located?
Yes, I get a lot of my information. I'm working with the long-term recovery groups through the voluntary agency Liaisons, and that's where I can get information about what's going on in the community, what are they needing, what is the unmet need, and the gap between what the federal funds can pay for and what they can't. I have seen the number of unmet needs at 1.2 billion, and it's probably going to end up being 2 to 3 times more than that. And those are just from the numbers of federal applicants that we know of. So we know there's another big pool of individuals that have not even been identified yet. So I get information from the long-term recovery groups, information from the group that I'm working with, Interagency Recovery Coordination, from the philanthropic groups, and from just about anybody, individual assistance, public assistance. I work across the board, identifying opportunities for funding.
Thanks. So we'll take one more question, and then we're going to be turning to our funder discussion. A reminder to funders on the call, if you raise your hand, then I'll be able to pass the mic to you when we get to that point in our webinar and hear from you reports about your work. Our last question is, can you recommend some disaster-specific resources for funders, like where they can find maps on damage assessments or charts or books?
Sure, there's a lot of good information on FEMA.gov that's posted on a regular basis. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, I can get with them and provide them with some additional resources and information, policy guidance, fact sheets, tips, or what have you. So I'm available to answer questions or send information on Harvey. Just reach out.
Thanks, Jackie. Denise, anything from you?
No, I think Jackie has it covered. I think we do have a lot of websites and resource information that I think may be helpful to funders, and I think a lot of those resources are posted on our public facing site. Sometimes navigating that might be a little difficult, so we're happy to try to help anyone with that. And actually, you know, if any of the funders get involved at the local community level, a lot of those resources are shared. So I'd really encourage any funders who want to know more and want to have access to a lot more information at the local level to actually engage in those community, either with our interagency coordination groups or with the long-term recovery groups, to really go in and get involved with them.
Thank you, Jackie. Just as a reminder to our audience, we'll have a written report, and in that we'll get your answers to questions about the Recovery Symposia, the Rebuild Texas Funder Forums, the HUD strike teams, all those questions that you asked that we're going to research and get some information back to you on. Now we'll turn to our funders who may be present, and we'll ask you if you have announcements about work that you're doing or questions of other funders. If you'll raise your hand, and I'll be able then to open the mic for you. All righty, we're gonna, we have one hand up. It's from Sally Ray. Sally, if you'll be sure to tell a little bit about your work and the name of your fund, and then what you'd like for us to know.
Sorry, was getting to the unmute button. I'm Sally Ray. I'm with the Hurricane Harvey Recovery Fund for the Center of Disaster Philanthropy. And our focus is on long-term recovery and supporting the vulnerable populations that are affected by the disaster. And we are particularly interested in those, for our next round of funding, in supporting those populations that might not have applied for FEMA for one reason or another. Perhaps they're immigrants, or their status is a little bit fragile. So I'm looking for input from other funders to see if perhaps they know of people that are working with those groups, or if they're funding in that area and are seeing gaps where we can maybe step in.
Any questions for Sally? Alrighty. Any other funders on the call who'd like to share information about the work they're doing, or who have questions of other funders? Sally, here's a question for you. Can you give your contact information, please?
Sure, I can be reached by email at Sally, SALLY.Ray, R-A-Y, at disasterphilanthropy.org, or by phone at 405-831-2245. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. It looks like that there are no more hands up for today's webinar, so we'll close for today. And we hope that one more. Thank you. Jane Mahoney, if you'll please introduce yourself and the work that you're doing. Jane Mahoney. Oh, Jane has said that she did not catch Sally's information, so I'll share that. It's Sally, SALLY.Ray, RAY, at disasterphilanthropy.org. And Jackie's contact information has been requested. And that is jacqueline.covington@fema.dhs.gov. Here's another question, or just an FYI. The Kinder Institute is doing some of the same work that Sally mentioned. So there may be an opportunity for some funder collaboration there. Any other questions or any other hands up from our audience? Great. Well, thank you again for attending. Our next briefing will be on Monday, February 12th at 2 p.m. Central. It's going to feature another recovery update from FEMA's Tracy Brasher, who's the Recovery Division Director for the region. And we'll also have as our special guest Dr. Xiaoqi Sim, who's the Vice President for Applied Research at Episcopal Health Foundation. He's been doing some research on some of the survivors of Harvey and their needs, and we'll have him speak with us about what they're doing and how that data might help with your own needs assessments to direct your funding. We'll be sending each of you an invitation with a registration link for the briefing, and we hope that you'll share this with others in your own organization or other interested funders. And be sure to, when you join us, to ask any remaining questions that you may have left over after our call today. You can also reach me at kim.maphisearly@disasterphilanthropy.org. Welcome and have a great afternoon. Bye.